All cultures have got some way of dealing with death and mourning. They have some means of dealing with the practicalities of dead bodies. There are normally three aspects to dealing with death. Hygiene, as in your treatment of the physical body. Helping the spirit of the dead move on, and dealing with the mourning of those left behind. Generally, as a species, we seem to have developed 4 different strategies of dealing with the hygiene aspect of the body. We bury people, as with most Christian funerals, or we cremate people, as is encouraged by Buddhism, or we entomb people, examples of which most famously is the pharaohs of Egypt, or we leave people to the elements. We leave them to decay, as Zoroastrianism teaches its adherents to do with their dead bodies. But if you are building a fantasy world, which of these methods should you choose for your culture? How does your culture deal with mourning? And how do they send the loved one on to the next world, dealing with the spirit leaving this world and transitioning to the next? That's what I want to talk about today. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you like these kinds of topics and you want to help me make more of these videos, you can check out my Ko-fi page down below. I have memberships and one-off donations, or you can buy my books available from Amazon. Okay, let's get cracking. Death comes for us all. Even in fantasy worlds, death might not be mandatory, but it does still come for many people. And when it does, you want to have some means of dealing with the disposal of the body, the potential spirit moving along, and the mourning of those left behind. This can form a very important cultural aspect. Births, funerals, and weddings are pretty much the key components that make up the life of a civilization. What are these different aspects that I spoke about? Let's first talk about Zoroastrianism's sky funerals. So they are called sky funerals because the deceased, the body, is placed on these open towers, and they're left there for the scavengers, the vultures and the foxes and those kinds of scavenger animals, to dispose of the body. The reason why this is taught is because under the Zoroastrianism faith, the body is held to be infested by demons after death. So by letting the animals consume the body, you release the demon spirits safely. Now, Zoroastrianism doesn't do this, but if you adopt that kind of funeral in your world, it offers you the opportunity to have vultures as a potentially holy animal. You could have vultures be called eaters of demons, and they could be the holy animal of your god. The same could apply to animals like hyenas, who primarily scavenge. And you can extend that application to things like shape changers. So you could have shape changers who can change shape into hyena being regarded as holy under the law of your religion. You could have them be seen as temple warriors or as vessels for the god. So I think that there is a lot of exploratory potential in having scavengers be so important in dealing with your dead that you trust them to safely dispose of the body. Speaking of magic, when we're talking about dealing with the body, necromancy is, of course, a very large consideration. Now, if necromancy is the enemy, if necromancy is forbidden, you are much more likely to have cremation as a funeral practice, because this denies the necromancer the opportunity to futz with the body. But if necromancy is seen as a legitimate magic, you might more likely have entombment as a burial ritual, because the necromancer could then call forth the body from the tomb, and when he's done, he could send the body back to his tomb, where the body can respectfully lie down and be dead again. And that is, I think, a much better show of respect for a legal necromancer than, say, calling the body from the grave and just leaving it there by the open grave. So I think that if you have legal necromancers, you're much more likely to have tombs. In the case of necromantic battles, I wonder if you would develop either magical or alchemical self-combustion devices. Because if you think about it, the problem with necromancers in battle is if you fall down and you're fighting the necromancer, you become a soldier in his army. The way to combat that is by destroying the body, right? Would you develop these flare-up bombs that consume the body even as it falls, kind of suicide-type devices that are used by soldiers to destroy their bodies if they feel they're too wounded, or by their friends if they find a dead soldier on the battlefield, they press this button and the body is consumed? It's an interesting thought. What do you think? Do you think such a thing would develop in a world where necromancy is commonly used as a battle practice? Let me know in the comments below. Speaking of necromancy, I think if you have necromantic monsters like lichs and so on, you're also much more likely to have tombs. Because if you're going to be spending any amount of time inside of your own grave, like a vampire or so on, I think you'd want a tomb. Like I think that if I was a vampire, I wouldn't want a grave, I'd want a tomb. Pretty much. What would you want? Tomb or grave? Let me know. And let's get back to funerals. So some cultures believed that the spirit of the dead person hung around like a ghost. And in order to get them to move along, the shaman of the tribe or the priest had to make loud sounds with much wailing and drumming and so on in order to drive the spirit to go towards the next world. And that's why some funerals have got very loud crying and weeping, and why you can even hire mourners to make these loud sounds in order to drive the spirit into the next world. But some cultures believed that the spirit needed encouragement to go to the next world with the use of grave goods. Now, grave goods were typically placed with the person into their grave or burnt with them on the funeral pyre, and the purpose was that the spirit would have these grave goods in the next world, so that they were destroyed in this world to be taken into the next world. The Vikings were probably the most well known for their grave goods. They had whole burial ships for some of their very high status individuals. Sometimes when there wasn't enough wood available for a ship, they would mark out a ship in stone on a grass field. The Vikings also charmingly believed that you should send slaves to serve high-ranking people in the next life, which meant, of course, that they killed slaves. They had a wonderful custom where they would take a slave girl, get her drunk, have all the men in the tribe rape her, and kill her to join the dead man in the afterlife. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'd rather be part of one of the cultures that, leave the body for the vultures. Like, with my kind of luck, I'd be the slave girl they pick. Anyway, grave goods was also a flex of sort. The richer you were, the richer your grave goods were. But if you really want to talk flex and funeral, you have to talk about the pharaohs of Egypt. Those guys built themselves the most impressive tombs with the best grave goods. I think that becomes a very interesting part of your world. If you had a civilization that was so rich, their kings built these monuments to themselves where they were entombed, especially if you then bring magic and artifacts into the mix, and you have this be a setting where that civilization has gone, they've died, leaving behind these ruins in a post-apocalyptic setting. Because now you have created a Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones type setup where you can just go crazy with all kinds of undead monsters and creatures from the past and magic and technology and all kinds of bananas with your funeral practice of the civilization that has died. And that was my thoughts on funerals in fantasy worlds. Please do give this video a thumbs up and maybe check out my video on how to create a religion in a fantasy world. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds.